Hey, David Brewster here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is Songwriting Secrets, Part 1, Chord Progressions. And I have had a lot of comments and messages and requests to kind of focus more on songwriting and, music theory and kind of unlocking some of these kind of hidden secrets and behind the scenes ideas that happen in music. And really, it depends on what you're listening to or what you're kind of going for. If you're writing music or studying music, analyzing a certain song or something like that. Because you can have very basic, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 chord songs, something like the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or something like that. And then you can have very complicated, very intense music, John Coltrane or Alan Holdsworth or something like that, where you might have 50 chords in one song. So it really depends on what you're listening to or what you're writing or attempting to do with music. And you can kind of think of it like swimming. You're either in the kiddie pool or you're literally swimming in the musical ocean, which the water can get pretty deep. And you might feel like you're drowning, sometimes. But this is really just going to kind of help you understand chord progressions a little bit more. And if you've already studied this, or if you're a more advanced player, this might be very simple for you. But for a lot of players out there, a lot of students I've worked with, people I've talked to, even people I've played with in bands, they didn't really have a firm grip on what we're going to look at in this lesson. So hopefully this is going to unlock some new ideas and some new things in music for you. So here we go. If you have questions related to chord construction, I did do 2 videos on this channel so far focusing on chord construction and attempting to answer some of the questions I've had over the years from students and peers and just people in general that have asked me about, building chords and constructing chords from a scale. And that's what those 2 lessons kind of focus on. So I highly recommend, if you haven't seen Chord Construction FAQ or Frequently Asked Questions, episode 1 and 2, after this is over, you can hop over there and definitely check that out, or you might want to check those out first and then revisit this lesson. That's kind of up to you. But and I've supplied some different things. There's a creative chords episode, jazz basic, primer, kind of a basic look at jazz chords and funk chords. I did a funk episode like that too, where it's just kind of the ABCs of funk and the ABCs of jazz. And I guess this is kind of the ABCs of chord progressions and where they come from and how you can kind of variate and mutate progressions in music. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to pick a key, and I'm purposely steering away from C major since it's always kind of shown in C major and music theory classes and books and things like that. So for those of you that have already kind of maybe worked on this in the key of C, by changing to a different key, that might kind of open up some new areas for you, or maybe you can kind of view it in a different way. And for those of you that have never studied this before, then it doesn't really matter where we start. We could start with C, we could start with G, or whatever key. But I'm going to purposely put this entire lesson in the key of A, either A minor or A major. And the reason why is I want to lock in to that tonality. And even though we're going to flirt with minor and major keys, that way you can kind of get your ear trained in a way from watching this video, and you'll hear what we're changing and doing within the key of A, whether it's minor or major. And then from there, you can explore other keys and move it to D or F sharp or whatever key you want to move it into. I just shared that chart that kind of showed harmonizing A Aeolian, or the natural minor scale. So we're going to start with A minor, and the notes in the key of A Aeolian, or the natural minor scale, it's just the first 7 letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then it starts over again with A. So if, we locate that on the guitar, which we've talked about this, A Aeolian. So there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And what we're going to do is build a chord off of every note in that scale, and we kind of talked about that in the chord construction episodes that I made. So we're not really going to dive into that again, since I've already kind of talked about that. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the most popular chord progression on the planet first, and then I'm going to start throwing out some alternatives and some different things you can do. So a 1-4-5 is everywhere. You know, it's been used in music for hundreds of years, technically. And that's really just the first, the fourth, and the fifth chords in whatever key you're in. So with that scale, if you just number the notes, you know, you have 7 notes, and you look at the first note, the fourth note, and the fifth note, that's A, D, and E. And in the key of A minor, that progression, of course, would be, you know, a minor 1, a minor 4, and a minor 5. Now they also call that a minor blues progression. Very standard, very simple stuff, but that's the beginning or the basis of what we're going to be looking at here. So that's a 1-4-5 in A minor, all minor chords, right? Now if we flip those all to major chords and we think more of, you know, Ionian or the major scale, we basically raise the third, raise the sixth, and raise the seventh of a minor scale, and it changes it into a major scale, and that would be this. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. But in A major, it would be the same 3 chords, only the major relative. You know, A major, D major, and E major. So think of like the verse part to Crazy Train, and you'll hear, technically it's a 1-5-4-1 during the verse. You know, A major, and then there's E over A, which is kind of functioning as the 5 chord, and then D over A, which is functioning as the 4 chord, and then back to A, right? Stuff, but you can kind of hear, you know, that's the major version, and you know, if we switch that back to minor again, you can kind of compare the two, you know, the major progression and the minor progression. The next step here is to understand there's different ways you can kind of manipulate those 3 chords. So the 1-4-5 has been used everywhere: rock and blues and country and folk and classical and just about every style of music you can imagine. So next we're going to talk about diatonic progressions. And eventually in this series I will talk about non-diatonic progressions, which I'm guessing some of you out there are probably desperately waiting for that information. Because that's when you're bending the rules and kind of breaking some of these rules. But you have to know what the rules are before you actually are able to break them. So we have to start with this first. And then we'll get into non-diatonic and some weirder things, you know, down the road. But with this, you know, a diatonic major version of that progression would just be all major chords: A major, D major, E major. So that's diatonic major. Diatonic minor would be the same thing, but they're all minor chords. And we talked about that a second ago with the minor blues version. Okay, and then we also have dominant substitution, which this happens in blues all the time. So if you're a rule breaker and you want to, you know, bend the rules of music theory, check out some blues, because blues musicians do that all the time. And this would be changing all 3 of those chords to dominant 7th chords, you know, A7, D7, and E7. Right? So we've got the minor blues where they're all minor chords, and then the dominant substitution where they're all dominant 7th chords. And that's kind of the secret of the blues. You know, you have the dominant 7 version, and then you also have the minor version. And it's kind of rare to find a blues song that just sticks with straight major chords. And it's even more rare to find a blues song that uses major 7th chords. It's almost always, you know, dominant 7. You will find minor 7 being used, But the jazzy, major 7 that we talked about in the jazz guitar primer isn't really very common in blues. It's more that dominant 7 kind of sound. Think, B.B. King and Albert King and some of those artists, and you'll hear that sound a lot. Let's twist this progression. So now let's take the minor 1 chord, and instead of playing a minor 4 chord, let's imply or change it to some sort of major chord. And the first one here, I'm just going to play A minor, and then we're going to move over and play D7. And this is basically signaling or flirting with Dorian. And you can definitely hear this in funk, you can hear it in jazz and fusion. Carlos Santana loves doing this. It's kind of the Carlos Santana secret chord progression. But that would be A minor, and then D7. Think of Oyo Como Va and some of those famous, Santana songs, and you'll hear that actually in action. And you can kind of hear that minor 1 and a major 4. There I was playing A minor 7, and I played D9 a minute ago. That's really popular is playing a minor 1 and then you change and play a major 5 or a 7th chord on the 5 chord. And you can hear this in classical music, you can hear it in Hotel California by the Eagles and tons of stuff. Yngwie does this all the time. So that's going to signal harmonic minor by changing the 5 chord to a dominant 7th chord. So that would be A minor and either E major or A minor to E7. And you can kind of hear that's that raised 7th, part of harmonic minor. It has a very distinct sound. That cadence kind of moving from the E7 back to A minor. It really catches your attention, and you've heard that, hundreds if not thousands of times in music, but that's powerful. That's the powerful secret behind kind of twisting some of these chords and these progressions, is it really kind of draws attention, to what's being played, and that's a good example of that. Another example of twisting the chords around in this progression. This is known as the pop progression, or it's nicknamed the pop progression. And you can hear this in the Beatles, and there's a ton of pop music that features it. But you can hear it in classical music and other places too. And, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window is a good Beatles example, because during the verse it's just a regular 1-4, and then during the bridge it changes to a major 1 and a minor 4. But what we're going to do here is, we're going to still lock into the key of A. We've got A major, and then we're going to do D major, and then D minor. So we're basically borrowing from the parallel minor right there, because in A major, D would normally be the 4 chord, D major. But then you hear that little twist to D minor, and that's the secret, the Beatles' secret progression right there. And even though that existed before the Beatles, I think the Beatles really helped people understand, how they could twist that chord into the minor relative. Once you've spent some time kind of, playing and mutating and kind of exchanging and getting your hands dirty with these chords, you're going to get kind of tired of a 1-4-5 after a while. I mean, no offense to that progression. It's been used, hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of times. But after a while, you kind of, your ear almost begs to hear something different. Get away from those same 3 chords. And 3-chord songs are very popular. Here's an image just kind of giving you some idea of how many songs, feature just a 3-chord progression. Adding one more chord to the mix is also very popular, 4-chord songs. And here's an image showing songs that have 4 chords in the progression, and they're very popular. What we're going to do now is lock into A major. And we're going to look for the minor chords that live in A major. So that's going to be the 2, the 3, and the 6. And in the key of A major, that's going to be B minor, C sharp minor, and F sharp minor. So any of those 3 chords can be kind of included in a 1-4-5 progression. And in some situations or some chord progressions, they might actually replace one of the chords. The 1 chord's usually present, but they might replace the 4 chord with the 2 chord, or they might replace the 5 chord with the 3 chord, or something like that. And you can start mixing and matching these around. So right there, I would recommend just listening to what it sounds like when you move from A major to B minor, which is the 2. Now listen to what it sounds like when you go to the 3 chord, which is going to be C sharp minor, which is right here. This has a really good ring to it. Which is that F sharp minor, you can definitely hear this in a ton of songs. Think of the old song like Runaway by Del Shannon. There's a ton, the Isley Brothers Shout, famously built around those 2 chords. Right? That 1 to 6. And that's a major 1 to a minor 6. Very common sound. We're really just introducing those minor chords. Once again, in the key of A major, that's B minor, C sharp minor, and F sharp minor. Kind of introduce these 3 minor chords that exist in a major key. You can start creating, 4 or 5 or 6 chord progressions. But before we get too carried away and start adding, more and more chords to the mix, let's just keep it really simple. So we went from a 1-4-5, which is a 3 chord progression, to including, any of those 3 minor chords that we kind of revealed. So the big one here, I guess, that's been used, used a lot in the 50s, and you can definitely hear it creep through the 60s and 70s and even new music today. That's a 1-6-4-5. And think of Stand By Me, by Benny King. And that's a very famous, example of this. And that would basically be, an example in the key of A. That would be A major, F sharp minor, and then D major to E major, right? It should definitely kind of ring a bell. It's a very common progression. Something like that. So you can hear that all over the place. Very common progression. Right, this is just the first, installment of this, but I do have a lot of other lessons kind of prepared that kind of go down this avenue of thought. And if you're interested in learning more about this, I thought about talking about modulations and modal interchanges and just descending and ascending, kind of linear sequence progressions and things like that. Just all sorts of different areas of songwriting and music writing, but adapting it to the guitar and actually breaking some of this stuff down so you can kind of understand what some of the greatest songwriters you've ever heard kind of tapped into and did when they wrote music. So it's a big subject, and we had to start somewhere. So I kind of started with the basics here, just to kind of give us a point to begin from so we can build from here. So leave some feedback and some comments if you like this. I definitely have plans to kind of kick the door open as far as this topic and this subject matter, but I'm not really sure what the viewers out there are going to think of this. If you want to learn more about songwriting and kind of tap into yourself, this is exactly the type of stuff you need to learn, because learning licks and learning riffs and things like that are fun and it's important. But really understanding like the nuts and bolts of music is what it's really all about, because then you'll understand what everybody is doing. You may not be able to play what everybody's doing, but at least you'll understand what it is, and then you can start to kind of chip away, at some of those things that you hear or see that you'd like to be able to do. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.